I'd been working myself to the brink of burnout and was desperate for an escape, somewhere remote, quiet, and scenic. That's when I found a gorgeous lake house in Michigan on Vrbo. The listing boasted floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pristine water, a private dock, and a cozy living room with a stone fireplace. The reviews were mostly positive, praising the peaceful environment and friendly hosts. One or two people mentioned that the house felt a bit isolated, but that was exactly what I was looking for. I booked a week, picturing myself kayaking by day and writing by the fireplace at night. My first impression as I pulled up to the property was pure awe. The house was just as stunning as the pictures had promised, cabin-like with wood paneling and big windows that framed the serene lake. Late afternoon light glimmered on the surface of the water, and I felt my tension melt away. I'd barely parked my car when the host, Lori, appeared on the porch, waving warmly. She was an older woman with curly gray hair and a motherly smile. "Welcome," she called out. "I hope you'll love our little slice of heaven." It certainly felt heavenly, for the first day at least. I spent my time unpacking groceries, reading a novel by the dock, and enjoying the fresh, pine-scented air. The tranquility was exactly what I needed. Lori lived in a neighboring cabin just up the hill, and she'd said to call or text if I needed anything. She even stopped by once to bring me a homemade pie. Her kindness made me feel safe and at ease. By the second night, though, things shifted in subtle ways I couldn't initially identify. When I went out for a late paddle, I caught a glimpse of movement in the woods behind the house. It could have been a deer or another harmless animal, but it lingered in my peripheral vision. I found myself turning around constantly, scanning the tree line. Nothing was there when I looked directly, yet I couldn't shake that crawling sensation on the back of my neck. The following afternoon, I took a walk through the forest path that meandered around the lake. About halfway through the loop, I noticed footprints in the mud leading away from the main trail. They were large, definitely an adult's, and they veered off into a denser part of the woods. My gut told me to keep going and not follow them, but curiosity tugged at me. Eventually, sense prevailed, and I hurried back to the house. That night, I locked every door and window carefully. Something about this place felt less welcoming by the hour. On the third evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. Rain pelted the windows, and wind rattled the roof as lightning flashed over the lake. It was dramatic, but also oddly comforting to be tucked inside with a fire crackling. While I was reading, my phone buzzed. It was from Lori. "Hope you're staying dry. Let me know if the storm gets too scary." I thanked her, thinking it was nice that she'd check in during bad weather. I went to bed early, lulled by the rumble of thunder. At 2 a.m., I jolted awake to the piercing sound of the house's security alarm. The shrill electronic wail filled every corner of the cabin, and my heart hammered in my chest. I stumbled out of bed in the dark, fumbling for my phone. Just as I found the flashlight app, the alarm abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I ran to the control panel near the front door, but saw no error message or sign of forced entry. Everything appeared normal. Confused and still shaking, I texted Lori. The alarm just went off. "Is there a glitch in the system?" A few minutes later, she responded, "That's strange. Must be a glitch. I'll come by in the morning to check on it." I tried to go back to sleep, but every rustle of leaves outside made my heart pound. Lori arrived bright and early, apologizing profusely. She said it must have been a power surge during the storm. That explanation eased my worry a bit, until that evening when the alarm went off again, exactly at 2 a.m. This time I was more prepared. I leaped out of bed, turned on lights, and sprinted to the front room. Once again, the alarm ceased after a few seconds. I texted Lori. "It happened again. See you in time." "Are you sure it's a glitch?" No immediate response. I spent the rest of the night in a mixture of anxious pacing and uneasy dozing on the couch. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message from Laurie. "I think you should come to my cabin tonight. The alarm might keep going off. It's probably not safe if there's a wiring problem. Normally, I wouldn't want to intrude, but I was exhausted and unsettled. Maybe it was better to spend one night somewhere else." I packed a small bag and hiked up the short trail to her place. She greeted me with that same motherly smile, her cabin warm and decorated with homemade quilts. She insisted I take the guest room, telling me she had plenty of space. Despite her hospitality, something felt off. As I settled in, I realized her windows faced directly toward the lake house. Had she been watching me all this time? I recalled the single glowing light I'd seen in the distance every night. Was that her, observing my every move? My mind ricocheted through possibilities. That night, I found it impossible to sleep. Around midnight, I heard floorboards creaking outside my door. My heart pounded, and I held my breath, straining to hear. Slow, deliberate footsteps moved past, then faded. I thought about calling out to Laurie, but something stopped me, an instinctive dread. I quietly stood, pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Fumbling for my phone, I checked the time. 12:10 a.m. Another hour before the alarm would normally go off. Unable to handle the tension, I decided I had to see what was happening at the lake house. I slipped on my shoes, quietly made my way through the living room and out the front door. The cold night air hit me, and my lungs seized with fear. As I crept down the trail, every twig snap under my foot made me cringe. The lake reflected the moonlight, a silver mirror in the darkness. I paused, noticing a faint glow from inside the lake house. I knew I'd turned off all the lights before leaving. So who was in there now? Adrenaline pushed me to continue. I approached the house from the side, peering through a window. A single lamp lit the living room. Standing by the fireplace was Laurie, or someone who looked like Laurie, adjusting something on the security control panel. Then I saw him, a tall man I'd never met, wearing dark clothes and holding what looked like a toolkit. He turned to Laurie, nodding. I couldn't catch what they said, but she handed him something that gleamed in the light. Could it have been a key? My stomach lurched. They moved towards the back of the house, out of my line of sight. My mind raced. Why had Laurie lied about the glitch? Why were they in the house in the middle of the night? The pieces began to fall into place. The alarm going off at the same time could have been orchestrated to scare me, to make me leave the house so that they could do something inside without me around. But what? My phone vibrated in my pocket. I jumped at the sudden sensation, then quickly silenced it. A text from Laurie. "Where are you?" A chill ran down my spine. She'd realized I was missing. My eyes locked on the front door, a wave of panic seizing me. If she found me snooping, what would she do? I had to make a split-second decision. Staying to gather more evidence felt risky. I didn't know who this man was or what Laurie was truly capable of. I backed away from the window, careful not to trip on the steps. Then I took off, running full tilt down the edge of the property. I didn't care how much noise I made. I just wanted to reach my car. Branches scraped my arms and my feet slipped on the damp ground. When I finally reached the driveway, I fumbled for my keys. My hands shook so violently that it took 3 tries to get them in the ignition. The headlights burst on, illuminating the gravel and part of the cabin behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw Laurie stepping onto the porch, her face contorted in anger or confusion, or both. That was the last I saw of her as I floored the gas and peeled away. I drove straight to the nearest motel in the next town over, every nerve on high alert. Once inside the safety of a locked room, I called Vrbo's customer service line and relayed the entire event. The representative seemed genuinely concerned, but couldn't do more than file a report, promising to investigate and contact the host. I never found out what Laurie or that unknown man was planning in the Lek house that night, or if they'd pulled similar stunts with other guests. A week later, I got a partial refund and a terse email from Vrbo stating that the property was under review. The listing soon disappeared from the site. I still have nightmares about Laurie's face in the mirror as I sped away, the memory of her standing in the porch light lodged in my mind. The cabin that once looked like a tranquil retreat now felt like a trap, orchestrated by a smiling host who knew exactly how to lure in unsuspecting guests. To this day, I triple-check the security features of any Vrbo rental before booking. That one experience taught me that a charming facade can hide unimaginable deceit, and I'll never again ignore the goosebumps that crawl up my arms when a place feels just a little too quiet, a little too remote, and run by someone with a little too friendly of a grin. When I stumbled upon a picturesque vineyard cottage in the heart of California wine country on Vrbo, I thought I'd found the ultimate writer's retreat. The photos showed a quaint stone guest house surrounded by vines, promising peace, inspiration, and all the Pinot Noir I could ask for. The reviews practically screamed idyllic, and the host, Lenora, had a reputation for providing homemade bread and jam for her guests. As a freelance journalist working on a travel piece, it seemed perfect, maybe too perfect. I arrived in the late afternoon. Sunlight bathed the rows of grapevines in warm gold, and the small cottage looked welcoming with its ivy-covered walls and old wooden shutters. Lenora was waiting with a basket of bread, jam, and fresh eggs, beaming like a proud innkeeper. She pointed out the best spots in the vineyard for morning walks and told me she lived in the main house a short stroll away. The interior of the cottage was rustic but comfortable. A single bedroom, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a kitchen that smelled of aged wood. I felt at ease almost instantly. That evening, I opened a bottle of local wine and watched the sun go down over the vines. It was impossible to picture anything ominous in such a serene setting. My first night passed without incident, and by day I explored the surrounding small towns. But on my second evening, as I was winding down, I heard a noise outside, a faint rustling, like someone passing through the vines. I peered out the window, seeing only the softly shifting plants. Likely an animal, I told myself, but something about the sound felt too deliberate, too heavy. It wasn't just wind or a small creature. It felt like a person. The next day, I asked Lenora if there were farmhands working late at night. She looked surprised. "No one works the vines after sundown," she said flatly. Then her expression shifted, as if she regretted her bluntness. "Could have been a deer or a coyote. We get wildlife sometimes." That night, I settled in with another glass of wine, trying to ward off any creeping paranoia. Around 10 p.m., the rustling returned, but louder this time. I switched off the cottage lights, then moved to the window to see if I could catch a glimpse of what was out there. Moonlight illuminated the vineyard. My gaze swept across row after row of vines until it landed on a dark shape, human-shaped, standing still among the foliage. My heart hammered as I strained my eyes to see more detail. The figure slowly moved, turning its head toward the cottage as though aware I was watching. I stumbled back from the window, my pulse in my throat. I grabbed my phone and dialed Lenora. No answer. I felt exposed, each window turning into a potential vantage point for whoever was out there. Fighting panic, I told myself to be rational. Maybe it was a worker or a neighbor. Still, I barricaded myself in the bedroom, checking on the window repeatedly until eventually exhaustion pulled me into uneasy sleep. Lenora came by the next morning with fresh bread, acting as though nothing had happened. Her calm demeanor made me question my own perception. Maybe I had overreacted. It was dark, my eyes could have played tricks, but deep down I knew what I'd seen was real. On the third evening, I decided to lock up early. I put away my laptop, drew the curtains tight, and tried to distract myself with a novel. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping at the front door. My blood ran cold. I looked through the peephole, but it was too dark to see anything. The tapping came again, soft but insistent. "Lenora?" I called out, my voice unsteady. No response. I weighed my options. Open the door and risk danger, or ignore it. While I hesitated, a muffled voice reached me from the other side, but I couldn't make out the words. Something about the tone, low, urgent, made my skin crawl. Adrenaline won out. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen and swung the door open, shining the beam outside. No one was there, only the endless rows of vines and shadows. Then I heard a branch snap to my left. I swung the light toward the sound, catching a brief glimpse of movement, a figure darting behind the vines. I slammed the door, heart pounding. I called Lenora again, and again she didn't answer. Was she even home? Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day I marched to the main house. The curtains were drawn, and no one answered my knocks. Not wanting to break in, I decided to check around the property. A path behind the house led to a smaller, dilapidated barn, partially hidden by overgrowth. As I got closer, I noticed footprints in the muddy ground, at least a few sets, as if multiple people frequented this spot. The barn door hung ajar, revealing a dark interior. Curiosity and fear wrestled inside me. I took a tentative step forward, shining my phone's flashlight inside. The interior was filled with old farming equipment, dusty crates, and, to my dismay, some kind of makeshift bedding in the corner. An unrolled sleeping bag, empty food containers, and scattered clothing. Someone was living here. But who? My mind whirled. Did Lenora know about this? Was the orchard intruder squatting on the property? A muffled sound made me jerk the flashlight to the far corner. I saw motion. A man rising from behind a crate, covering his face from the light. Fear seized me, but I couldn't move. He mumbled something, an apology or a plea. His voice was raspy, desperate. I backed away, heart hammering, and bolted out of the barn. Once I reached the main house, I dialed 911. Enough was enough. Local police arrived faster than I expected. I led them to the barn where the makeshift camp was, but the man was gone. They searched the vineyard, turning up nothing. Lenora finally appeared during this commotion, looking distressed, but also strangely composed. She told the officers she had no idea anyone was living in the barn. One of the cops looked skeptical, but there wasn't much they could do with no suspect in custody. That afternoon, Lenora insisted I relocate to a friend's guest house in town. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying, though she refused to meet my eye. I never knew. I truly never knew. The police presence had rattled her, but her apologies felt hollow, rehearsed. I packed my things and left, shaking from the adrenaline and betrayal. As I drove away from the vineyard, I couldn't help but notice how well hidden that barn was, how easy it would be for someone to slip in and out under cover of darkness. Had that figure in the vines been the man in the barn, or was there someone else still out there? And what role did Lenora really play? Had she really been clueless, or was this part of a bigger secret? I reported the incident to Vrbo. They launched an investigation and offered me a full refund. Like my first impression of the cottage, the site's response was polished and professional, but it lacked real answers. Over the next few weeks, I tried to follow up, wanting to know if they'd delisted the property or uncovered more information. Eventually, I learned that the vineyard listing was removed. Lenora's contact details went dark. Months later, I still get chills thinking about that shadow standing amidst the vines. staring at my cottage window. Did he know I was alone? Was he desperate or dangerous, or both? The line between a tranquil retreat and a harrowing ordeal can be as thin as a row of grapevines. Now, every time I step into a rental property, I check the surroundings with the same anxiety, listening for rustles in the dark, reminding myself that paradise can hide the darkest secrets. I'd always dreamed of visiting the American Southwest to experience its vast, otherworldly landscapes. So when I found a casita in rural New Mexico on Vrbo, I jumped at the opportunity. The listing boasted a private escape, set against towering red rock formations, with star-filled skies that rivaled any planetarium. The listing said the host, Ramon, provided guests with a telescope and guided stargazing tips. A few reviews mentioned an eerie stillness, but I shrugged that off as part of the desert's unique charm. I arrived at sunset. The casita was a small adobe structure with turquoise trim and a wraparound porch. The desert wind was still warm, carrying the scent of sage. Ramon was there to greet me, a tall man in his 50s with a sun-worn face and a firm handshake. "You'll love it out here," he said, "quiet like nowhere else on earth." He showed me around quickly: kitchen, living area, bedroom, then handed me the telescope's manual, saying I should try it out after dark. The first evening was magical. I set up the telescope on the porch, pointing it at the glittering band of the Milky Way. The quiet was indeed profound, broken only by the occasional distant howl of a coyote. I felt a deep sense of peace, far from city lights and noise. But around midnight, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and I heard a faint, high-pitched sound. It could have been the wind slicing through the rocks, except it resembled a woman's scream. I stood there, heart thudding, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Nothing. Over the next day, I explored the nearby hiking trails. The arid canyons and mesas were breathtaking. I took dozens of photos for my travel blog. When I returned to the casita, Ramon was gone. He lived in town about half an hour away, he'd said. I made dinner and decided to watch the sunset again from the porch. That's when I spotted something strange out near a cluster of large rocks. A small wooden cross, half buried in the sand, like a grave marker. A chill ran through me, but I tried to brush it off. The desert is full of memorials, I reasoned. Accidents can happen out here. That night, I awoke to footsteps crunching outside on the gravel. My bedroom window was open a crack, letting in the desert breeze. Carefully, I peered outside. In the moonlight, I saw a silhouette moving near the same rock cluster. My gut twisted. Another hiker? But it was nearly 2 a.m. I watched, breath suspended. After a moment, the figure knelt by the wooden cross, head bowed. A wave of relief and pity washed over me. Perhaps they were visiting a loved one's makeshift grave, some personal ritual. I considered going out, but fear held me back. Instead, I stood there, silently watching. Eventually, the figure rose and vanished into the darkness. Come morning, I wrestled with what I'd seen. Should I mention it to Ramon? When he dropped by that afternoon to see if I needed anything, I mustered the courage to ask about the cross. He stiffened, his gaze turning distant. "That's old history," he finally said. "A woman died out here years ago under mysterious circumstances." I pressed for details, but he only shook his head. "Locals say her spirit still wanders at night. You shouldn't go poking around those rocks." His warning sent a shiver up my spine. Over the following nights, the haunting scream-like sounds returned, as did the silhouette near the cross. Each time, the figure's posture seemed mournful, as if weighed down by sorrow. My curiosity warred with my growing fear, and on my final night, I couldn't resist. I decided to go out there myself. Armed with a flashlight, I walked across the desert floor. My heart thudded in my ears, the beam flickering over scrubby plants and dusty rocks. As I drew closer, I heard soft sobbing, so faint I wondered if my mind was playing tricks. But then I saw the figure, dressed in loose, pale clothing, kneeling at the cross. "Hello," I called out, voice trembling. The sobbing ceased instantly. The figure slowly turned its head toward me. In the moonlight, I could see a pale face streaked with tears, but there was an emptiness in the eyes that made my blood run cold. Before I could say anything more, the figure faded, dissolved into the darkness. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. Terror thundered in my chest. Did I just see a ghost? I sprinted back to the casita, adrenaline fueling every step. Once inside, I locked the door and windows, trembling from shock. Was I hallucinating? Desert illusions? But deep down, I believed what I saw. I texted Ramon in a panic, telling him I'd seen someone by the cross. There was no immediate response. The rest of the night was a blur of pacing, checking windows, and fighting the urge to flee. At first light, I packed my car. Forget the last day of my reservation. I was leaving. As I pulled onto the dirt road, my phone buzzed with a message from Ramon. "It's best you move on. The desert holds memories that won't rest." That cryptic reply solidified my resolve to get as far away as possible. After I returned home, I did some digging online. I discovered a local legend about a woman who disappeared in that area decades ago. Some say she'd been murdered by a jealous lover. Others said it was a wandering spirit from an older tragedy. Regardless of the story, the cross was placed by her grieving family, and odd sightings had been reported ever since. It left me shaken but also fascinated. Vrbo refunded my unused nights but had no comment on the supernatural rumors. Ramon never responded to my follow-up messages. The casita listing vanished a few months later, replaced by a new property in the same area. I couldn't help but wonder if other unsuspecting guests would encounter the same chilling presence among the rocks. Even now, when I recall that night, I remember the figure's hollow eyes and the quiet, heart-wrenching sobs under the moonlight. The desert was beautiful, but it was also haunted by echoes of a sorrowful past. Some experiences leave a mark on your soul, reminding you that not all wonders in the world are benign, and sometimes the greatest danger lies not in the living, but in the remnants they leave behind. I found a Vrbo rental in the Colorado Rockies that looked like it had leapt off a postcard, an A-frame chalet perched on a slope with panoramic views of snow-capped peaks. The host, Greg, claimed it was the perfect spot for ski enthusiasts, hikers, or anyone wanting to bask in alpine majesty. The pictures showed a snug loft bedroom, a stone fireplace, and a deck with a hot tub. Glowing reviews mentioned how kind and accommodating Greg was. It felt like the perfect place to recharge and conquer some writer's block. My drive through winding mountain roads ended in a small clearing where the chalet sat. The late afternoon sun made the chalet's windows shimmer like gold. I nearly squealed with delight at how perfect it all seemed. Inside, everything was spotless. Homey quilts, rustic wooden furniture, and postcards from past guests pinned on a bulletin board. On my second day, as I was reading by the fireplace, I heard a distinct tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. Confused, I glanced around, eventually tracing it to the large window overlooking the valley. No one was outside, but the sound persisted for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. Probably ice shifting on the window frame, I reasoned. That night, the wind howled around the chalet, and I heard more strange noises, scratching along the exterior walls. At times it sounded like an animal scurrying, but other times it had a slower, deliberate rhythm that made my skin crawl. I repeatedly got up to check the windows, shining a flashlight out into the darkness. Each time, I saw nothing but swirling snow. The following morning, I texted Greg to ask if any wildlife, bears or wolves, could be around. He replied swiftly, "We do get wildlife, but they rarely come too close. I wouldn't worry." Trying to let it go, I bundled up and went snowshoeing along a nearby trail. The breathtaking vistas temporarily banished my unease. That night, exhausted, I fell asleep quickly. Sometime after midnight, a metallic clanging jolted me awake. It sounded like pots or pans being slammed together. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Grabbing a heavy ski pole for protection, I crept down to the kitchen. The lights were off, but as I switched them on, I found the pots and pans scattered across the floor. My breath caught. Had I been sleepwalking? That seemed impossible. I'd never done that before. And the cabin door was still locked from the inside. Shaken, I picked up the kitchenware, half expecting someone to leap out from behind the counter. Nothing. The only thing out of place was a faint odor in the air, something musky and stale, lingering for just a moment before it dissipated. I barely slept the rest of the night, every sound amplified by my anxiety. The next day, I was determined to stay alert. I double-checked the doors and windows, even tested them to ensure they latched securely. Greg offered to come by and inspect, but I declined. Somehow I felt more comfortable dealing with this on my own. Sunset found me on the deck in the hot tub, trying to calm my frayed nerves. The swirling steam and the pink glow of the setting sun on the peaks momentarily lulled me into a sense of peace. That was shattered when I spotted footprints in the snow about 10 yards away. They led from behind a tree to the side of the chalet, then stopped. There were no return tracks. My pulse thudded, and I nearly jumped out of the water. Someone had been lurking. I dashed inside, locked up, and texted Greg in a panic. Half an hour later, he showed up, concern etched on his face. We searched the perimeter with flashlights, but the falling snow had already half covered the tracks. He reassured me he'd stay a while, so we sat by the fireplace making uneasy small talk. After about an hour, satisfied that no one was around, Greg left, reminding me to call if I heard anything else. I tried to rest, but adrenaline kept me wide awake until well past midnight. Finally, I dozed off. Then came the clatter. This time it was in the loft bedroom. I gasped, heart pounding, as I saw shadows flickering under the door, like someone was in there. Gripping my phone, I dialed Greg. Ring after ring, no answer. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, I gripped the ski pole again and burst into the bedroom, flipping on the light. Empty, except the closet door stood open, and a cold draft hit me. I realized with a start that the small attic access panel inside the closet was ajar. A swirl of panic seized me. Could someone be hiding in the attic? I jumped back into the hall, trying Greg again. Still no answer. The draft grew stronger, and I heard scuttling above. Whether it was a person or an animal, I needed to get out. I fled outside into the bitter cold, hopped in my car, and drove straight down the mountain to the nearest 24-hour convenience store. My hands trembled so violently that it took multiple attempts to type out a message to Vrbo support. I explained the bizarre events, the footprints, the open attic. They responded sympathetically, but advised me to contact local authorities or the host directly if I felt unsafe. By dawn, I managed to get through to Greg. He sounded groggy and alarmed by my story. Promising to check it out, he urged me to stay in a motel for the night. I followed his advice, certain I wouldn't get any more rest at the chalet. The next day, Greg claimed he found no sign of forced entry, or anyone in the attic, only some old insulation disturbed by critters. He offered me a free night to make up for the scare, but I wasn't setting foot back in that house. Later, as I packed my things with Greg by my side, I noticed something unnerving in the kitchen, a faint smear of muddy footprints near the door to the basement. Greg insisted the door stayed locked, but if so, how did footprints get on the inside? He had no answer, and we both avoided eye contact. I drove away as quickly as possible, heart still hammering. Vrbo gave me a partial refund and removed the property from listings, pending review. I never did find out who or what was creeping around that chalet, or how they managed to slip in and out without tripping the locks. Sometimes I can't help but imagine a stranger quietly nesting in the attic or basement, observing my every move. Now, before I book any Vrbo, I scan the photos for hidden entrances or suspicious details. Paranoia, maybe, but better safe than sorry. The Rockies, majestic as they are, will forever remind me that wilderness can hide more than just bears and cougars. I was attending a week-long convention in a historic New England town, and hotel prices were through the roof. Vrbo seemed like a cheaper, cozier option. I found a charming 3-story townhouse near the conference center. The host, Danielle, had an array of 5-star reviews praising her for cleanliness and quick communication. The listing's photos showed quaint furniture, vintage decor, and plenty of sunlight streaming in through large windows. It seemed perfect for both business and downtime. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon and let myself in via a lockbox code Danielle had provided. The place lived up to expectations. Polished hardwood floors, plush rugs, and decorative touches like antique lamps and framed botanical prints. The first floor had a living room and kitchen, the second floor a bedroom and bathroom, and the top floor was described as additional storage space I wouldn't need. Everything felt neatly curated. After an exhausting day at the conference, I was ready to crash early. Around 11 p.m., I heard muffled noises coming from above. Initially, I chalked it up to the old house settling, creaks and groans in the night. But then I detected a rhythmic thumping, almost like footsteps. My heart sank. Was there someone in the attic? Trying to remain calm, I remembered the listing said the top floor was off limits. Maybe Danielle used it for personal storage. Could she have come by and not told me? I texted her, "Hey, hearing noises upstairs. Is anyone else staying here?" She replied quickly, "No, just you. The house is old, could be pipes or the wind." I managed to sleep, but not without waking several times at the slightest sound. The following evening, the footsteps returned, heavier this time. I decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I walked up the narrow stairs. A locked door blocked access to the top floor, just as described. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence now. Frustrated and uneasy, I returned to my bedroom. If it was an animal in the attic, how big did it have to be to make footsteps like that? On the third night, something changed. As I lay half awake, I heard the attic door at the top of the stairs squeak open. My skin prickled. Who had unlocked it? I sat up, adrenaline surging. The floor creaked. Someone was coming down from the attic. My mind raced. Call the police. Confront them? Frozen with fear, I stared at the bedroom door. If they tried to come in, I had no means of defense besides a lamp or my laptop. After an agonizing pause, the floorboards groaned again, and I heard soft steps descending to the first floor. Heart in my throat, I mustered the courage to peek out. The hallway was dark, but I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure. Long hair, slender build, slipping around the corner toward the living room. A quiet panic gripped me. Was it Danielle, an intruder? I grabbed my phone and tried texting Danielle frantically. "There's someone in the house." No reply. Then I dialed 911, whispering my situation. The operator told me to stay put, remain quiet, and wait for the police. Minutes crawled by like hours. Downstairs, muffled movement, then the distinct sound of the front door unlocking. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. The officers searched the townhouse. The attic door was open. Upstairs, they found a small living area, a makeshift bed, a half-eaten sandwich, and personal items like clothes and a few photographs. Someone had been staying there, quietly coexisting above me. The police also discovered the door to the attic had a latch on the inside, meaning it could be locked from upstairs. They took my statement and tried to reach Danielle, but she didn't answer. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel. The next morning, Danielle finally responded, claiming she had no idea anyone was living in the attic. She sounded genuinely shocked. Said she rented the townhouse from a relative and had never inspected the top floor's contents beyond basic storage. But the police suspected she might have known more than she let on. They found personal documents upstairs tied to someone named Rachel, though they couldn't confirm the person's whereabouts. Vrbo was quick to react, offering me a full refund and removing Danielle's listing from their site pending investigation. I never returned to the townhouse, leaving most of my belongings behind until the police assured me it was safe to collect them. The images of that secret living space haunted me. How many nights had that person, Rachel, listened to me go about my routine, just one floor below? I later learned from the police that the attic dweller likely used a hidden outside entrance to come and go. Whether Danielle was complicit or truly ignorant remains a mystery. I can't forget the feeling of sheer vulnerability, realizing someone was creeping around within mere feet of me. It reminded me that even the most charming rental can harbor invisible tenants with their own unsettling agendas. Now, whenever I book with Vrbo or any similar platform, I'm hyper-vigilant about every corner of the property. I inspect attics, basements, and closets I'm told are off-limits. Maybe I'll never fully trust a listing again, because once you've experienced the footsteps overhead, the quiet rummaging in the night, you learn how thin the line between guest and intruder can be.